I think the two main things that affect the family farmers in my region, which is East Africa, for me, one, climate change, which is a big issue because these are largely not commercial farmers. They are just small-scale farmers. 85% of our farmers have below 2 acres of land, and therefore they don't have the adaptive capacity like the big farmers do. So climate change is really causing them a lot of problems in their production and productivity. The second key one, I think, which also makes the first one worse, is the lack of capital investment or lack of access to agricultural credit. If you have problems like climate change, they need new solutions, they need new innovations, they need new research, they need new investments, and they do not have money to do these investments on their farm. And there is hardly any financial institution that really deals with the small-scale farmers. And that makes it very difficult for them to adapt to the impacts of climate change. So for me, I think those two are intertwined, and the combination of those two makes it very, very difficult for a family farmer in my region to improve their farming, to improve their productivity. And those are the things that we ought to be looking to fix as we look to the decade of family farming. I think, thankfully, things like climate change are key on the agenda of UNFF, United Nations Decade of Family Farming. And I hope that we are going to make these priorities. The two things that are key for me, one is to put climate change at the top. Two, and most importantly, to put the women, who are the majority of the farmers, and the young people who have to take these technologies to the future, or who are the future of farming, put them at the center of this agenda. And I expect that there will be a lot of programs that help youth and women to become better actors in the farming sector, to become better actors in the policy agenda of their farms. And I hope that, most importantly, in general, farmers or farm organizations are the forefront of these initiatives, because no one knows farming better than farmers. So I think the farmers should be in charge of their agenda, should be in charge of their destiny, and so we have to work along the lines of building the capacity of the different farm organizations in every region to ensure that they have the capacity to be on top of this agenda, to be in the front, not in the back, listening to people, but in the front, guiding the agenda of farming, because no person is better at farming than a farmer. I think communication is very important, and what makes it important is that one of the important things is that the farmers are aware of, for example, of the different programs that are going on. Let me give you an example. Where I come from in Uganda, I have not had any meeting or any agenda by government where they are inviting, for example, the Committee of Family Farming in Uganda. There is a committee, there's a steering committee, a national steering committee, but it's hardly visible. The only time you hear about it is when they are having their own meetings. So maybe the issue is about communication. I don't see any Ugandan person in this meeting. Did they know? So it's important that we communicate this agenda effectively, first of all, so that everyone knows it, but importantly understands it and buys into the agenda. Because whatever we are discussing here has to be implemented at the national level first, then before we come to the global level. So if this information is not going out properly to everyone this time around, including the government, the parliamentarians, and the farmers themselves. Two, communication is key because it's one of the biggest components for extension services. Family farmers, at least where I come from, hardly see an extension officer. You can spend a year or so without seeing an extension officer. Now, for me, communication is the most important ingredient in extension. So, in other words, communication is an important aspect both for the farmers, but also for the technocrats and the policymakers, so that everyone understands this agenda at the same level, and everyone understands what their role is, and everyone understands what they have to put in, and that can only be done by effective communication between and with different stakeholders. The only way that investments can benefit family farmers, if these investments are guided by the needs of the family farmers. And that can only be possible if the family farmers are determining or are part of the discussions that determine which investments go where. More often than not, that doesn't happen. A farmer is called to a meeting, or even a farmers organization. We represent farmers in Uganda. You're called to a meeting and they tell you that there is this project, it is going to be doing A, B, C, D. You are being called at the launch of the project, not at the planning of the project. And therefore, there's nothing much you can do, only to fall in line. And that's why there's a lot of investment in the agriculture sector, but the shift or the development of the sector in Uganda, let me tell you, there was a time when the annual growth of agriculture was 0%. I think now it stands about 2.3%. Now, if the agriculture sector is growing, I'm using the context of Uganda, is growing at below 3%, or even at 3%, and the population of Uganda is growing at 3.3% per annum, who is going to feed the balance? So the challenge is that these investments are determined by technocrats without consulting the farmers, and therefore you have money, a lot of money, going in things that are not particularly going to change the life of a family farmer, that are not particularly going to improve an extent. Until recently, where I come from, until recently in Uganda, we did not have extension extension officers at the lowest unit of government, which is called a sub-county in Uganda. And this is where farmers are. Farmers are not in towns. So you had these technocrats in towns, but none at the lower level, until we fought through our farmers' organization during the putting together of the policy on extension. And now there are extensionists, one for crop and one for animal at that level. But, for example, they are hardly facilitated. Very few have transport mechanism. What is an extensionist going to do without a means of transport to reach out to the farmers? Are they going to walk 50 kilometers to the farmers? No, they won't. So they are being paid salaries, but with minimal facilitation. And this is where investments are supposed to be going, in my view. But the challenge is that these investments are being decided by people that are not farmers without consulting farmers. So if it's ever going to make sense, if investments are going to make sense, the decisions of what kind of investments and where the investments go ought to involve, in fact, have farmers in the leading role in those discussions. Minus that, we keep on pumping money into agriculture with minimal change or below desirable levels of change. And that's where we have been. And if we want to succeed in this decade, that ought to change. They are bound to succeed because they are responding to the needs of the people whose investments are meant for. These people have been part of the process, and they have said, we want security for our land, therefore you can help us in A, B, C, D. For example, we want to negotiate our rights to land, but we don't know how. And therefore the investment should be in training us on how to negotiate with the people that we're supposed to negotiate with. Or we want to get land or for lease or whatever. But the thing is, the reason why it succeeds is that it is actually responding to a need, and it's going to something that is going to be useful for a farmer. It's not the same as telling a farmer that you come and I give you free seed. For example, in Uganda we have a program where the government supplies free seed. But I've visited I've gone to every part of the country. I've been in this for 12 years. I've gone every sector of every part of the country. And more often, you get farmers telling us, because we were wondering why, despite the distribution of all these seeds and seedlings, for free, by the way, which is not a wise thing, but that's what the government was doing, for free, was not making that of an impact. And you know what the farmers said? They said, look, we were never consulted when these things were being brought. I grow beans and maize. They brought coffee. But because it was for free, I planted it. But remember, this farmer has no knowledge whatsoever about growing coffee and how you're supposed to look after it. And worse still, they don't have an extension officer reaching them to guide them. So you have all this huge investment of billions going to free seed, but seed being distributed, wrong seed being distributed to the wrong farmers. And that's an example of how you can invest a lot of money, but if it's not guided by the needs of the community that is the recipient of that help, it's bound to fail. And you go to stores right now in many sub-counties, some of these things are drying. Why? Because people have rejected them. Some have taken them, planted them, but because they don't have the expertise, the production that doesn't come out properly, and the next season they abandon them and go back to their original normal practices. And therefore, for me, the simplest answer to why investments that are bound to succeed need to be working for, because it goes to the right people, it goes at the right time, and it fixes a need. And because if my need is an extension officer and you're paying him, then I'm going to improve. If my need is to learn how to grow grafted mangoes, for example, and you invest in training me how to grow them, then it's going to succeed. But if it's for mangoes and you train me in potatoes, then it's not going to succeed. I will still plant my mangoes or the potatoes that you give me, but it won't work. So the reason why it works is because it's actually going to a need, a specific need, and it's owned by the farmers. And that's another important aspect. The farmer feels part and parcel of this agenda. They feel these guys are helping me to do what I want to do, and therefore they put in more effort. If you're not doing that, it's very easy, for example, to go to a farm in my country where a farmer was given goats, and they will tell you, oh, I received goats. And you say, whose goats are those? Those goats are for NADS. NADS is the National Agricultural Advisory Services organization in my country. The farmer is not saying that they are my goats. The farmer is saying that those goats are for the government. So what effort are you going to put in something that you perceive not as being yours? That means that the farmer did not actually participate in that process. They don't feel like they are part of it. They don't own it. And therefore, it can't work. And that, I'm speaking that from experience because I've seen it year in, year out. So for me, I think that putting the beneficiaries at the center, in fact, if possible, in the lead, helps in them owning it and doing it well to the extent that, because they want it to benefit, they want it to succeed because it's going to benefit them in the long run.